Hi, everyone. Welcome to all of you. I'm Nancy Regan, and I am joined by Graham Stephen and Mark Horton. And we are the IRCC, the International Reliability Centered Maintenance Certification Committee. Jesus Afonte and Chris James cannot be with us today, but they are also examiners from the IRCC. And we are dedicated to helping you get the most out of your RCM analyses by making sure that you're using RCM principles properly. And today we have got a packed show for you. We're going to be talking about failure modes. So this week I'm presenting, and I chose failure modes because honestly, it is my favorite part of the RCM process. And of course, you can't have one step without the other, but it's one of the most important ones, in my opinion, and it's super important to get it right. In fact, reliability-centered maintenance gets a bad rap sometimes, that we don't get everything we need from reliability-centered maintenance. It takes too long, it's too expensive, it takes too many resources to carry out. And if you have found that that's the case, it may be that RCM principles weren't applied correctly, because when you apply RCM correctly, I mean, sure, it takes time and it takes resources because we live in the real world, not fantasy land, right? So to get anything worthwhile, we have to put energy into it. But when you do RCM properly with the right people, the results can quite literally transform organizations. Graham, Mark, and I have seen it firsthand, and it can be carried out really quite efficiently. So that's what we've got on board today. So before we dive in, Leah and Sonia, thank you so much for joining us today. And Sonia is joining from the gorgeous island of Trinidad. And we've got Abdul, and hey, Ed, welcome from Illinois. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so if you've got any questions, please do put them in the chat. Oh, I've got a typo somewhere. I don't even see where it is, but okay. Thank you for that, Graham, but I'm not even sure where it is. So if I've got a typo, I'm sorry, but that's actually quite, it's perfect for what we're talking about, because it's a failure mode, right? It's what causes failure, and that's what we're talking about today. So to orient ourselves with respect to where we are in the RCM process, if you aren't aware of it, reliability-centered maintenance consists of 7 steps, or answering 7 questions. And the way we promulgate reliability-centered maintenance is by doing it in a facilitated working group approach. So what we know, what works best, is when there's a facilitator, someone who's very well versed in RCM principles, leads a team of equipment experts. So the facilitator asks the RCM questions, the equipment experts give the technical answers, and the facilitators there just to make sure everyone's on track with respect to reliability-centered maintenance. So today, we're going to be focusing on step number 3, which is identifying failure modes. So that's where we are with respect to the RCM process, and we're going to focus just on that. So let's begin with this. What is a failure mode? Now, it's really important before we even start together today to identify what we even mean by what a failure mode is. Now, within our IRCC, we've got level 1 RCM certification up and running, and we certify in accordance with SAE J1011. Now, if you're not aware of it, let me see if it'll focus and I can show you. The SAE standard, it's called the Evaluation Criteria for Reliability-Centered Maintenance Processes. And it is essentially, it is the international standard that sets forth what an RCM process must include to be able to be called reliability-centered maintenance. And this document came to life because there were so many organizations out there, applying what they thought was RCM that actually wasn't. So we certify in accordance with this standard, and the the SAEJ 1011 defines a failure mode as a single event which causes a functional failure. So a simple way of saying that is what specifically causes failure. And the way I like to think about a failure mode is this. I like to think about a failure mode as a road, because I like to break things down simple in my brain to understand things. So I think of it like a road, right? So let's say I live in Huntsville, Alabama, and let's say I want to drive to Las Vegas. Well, if I start driving east, I'm never going to get there, right? Because Las Vegas is west of here. So when we write our failure modes properly and in the right amount of detail, those are the two things we're going to talk about today, it leads us to us being able to properly identify failure management strategies. Now, in the context of RCM, when we talk about failure management strategies, we're talking about proactive maintenance tasks, and that could be preventive maintenance, like scheduled replacements, scheduled overhauls, and condition-based maintenance tasks, and also some other default strategies, other actions, like maybe we need a redesign, or maybe we need to beef up training in some way. Okay, so that's why writing failure modes is so important. Now, our mentor, John Mowbray, what he used to say about failure modes is that it's the currency of physical asset management. Or in other words, an easier way to say it, it's the currency of reliability, right? So here I've got American dollars here, right? So I've got $100 bills, I've got $20 bills, I've got $10 bills, $5 bills, and I've got $1 bills. So I love that John used this analogy because it's really easy to kind of get it in our brains. So the gist of it is this $100 bill is worth way more to me than this $1 bill, right? So the same thing goes for our physical assets. We've got a whole bunch of failure modes that can affect our machines. But it's up to us as responsible custodians to figure out how we're going to manage each one. And RCM helps us to identify which failure modes are our $100 failure modes and which ones are our $1 failure modes. So all failure modes are not created equal. But in order to figure out which are our hundreds and which are our fives and which are our 20s, we have to identify them first. And then the rest of the RCM process helps us to figure out which ones matter the most and what we should do, if anything at all, to manage them. That's why it's so important to start at the beginning and identify them properly. Okay? Now, let me stop in the chat and see if there are any questions, or if Graham and Mark, if you have anything to add before we get into the details. Let's see. Hello, Hector. Someone's joining us from Colorado Springs. Abdul says, what is the best way to start assessing failure modes of an equipment? Abdul, start with reliability-centered maintenance. And you don't have to do RCM on every machine in your organization. You can apply it as widely or as narrowly as you feel you need to. So sorry, Graham and Mark, did you have anything to add before we go on?
No, that's great, Nancy. Thanks.
Okay, so the other thing that John said is that we manage physical assets at the failure mode level. Okay, so let's first start with talking about why it's important to write failure modes properly. Hold on, I got to get my mouse to the other side. I'm using two screens. Here we go. Okay, so let's just take, for example, an air compressor, right? And on the left-hand side of the screen, you're going to see air compressor failure modes that are just written as a matter of routine, or that are written with not much thought involved, right? Are we going east or west? Are we going to Vegas, or are we going to the Bahamas? Although we can't drive there from here, but the direction is correct. Okay, and on the right-hand side, you're going to see failure modes that are written effectively. So let's take a look. So on the left-hand side, you see a primary function for a compressor, but let's focus in on the failure modes. We've got intake filter clogged, and we've got intake filter damaged. Now, the thing about those two failure modes is that they're not really failure modes. In the context of RCM, those are failure effects, right? Because if we go back to the definition from SAE J1011, J1011 tells us that a failure mode is what specifically causes failure. Well, then we have to ask ourselves as responsible custodians, what specifically would cause our filter to clog? So let's look at this one right here first. We could get more specific by saying intake filter clogged due to normal use, right? Because an air filter will clog due to normal use. If we do nothing to predict or prevent it, it will eventually clog because it's doing its job. Now let's look at the second one, which is intake filter damaged. Well, now I would ask, if I were facilitating, I would ask, well, what specifically causes the filter to be damaged? Well, we can break it down a little more. Intake filter deteriorates due to normal use. Maybe the element of the filter itself is subject to deterioration. If it is, then that failure mode would go in your RCM analysis. Another one is intake filter damage due to improper installation. See, when we do reliability-centered maintenance, our job in this example is to figure out what would cause us not to get what we need from our compressor. And if there's the possibility that it's improperly installed, then that should go in our RCM analysis. If that is valid for our operating environment, in our operating context, then we would put it in there. Why? So that we can go further on down the RCM process, write our failure effect, figure out how it matters, in other words, identify failure consequences, and then come up with a failure management strategy. Now, what do I mean by that? Here's what I mean, and here's why it matters so much. With intake filter clog due to normal use, we may decide to monitor the differential pressure and replace the filter as required. For deteriorates due to normal use, we might say, hey, let's change that on a scheduled basis. And for being improperly installed, our team might decide that we need to institute a new training procedure or augment maintenance instructions. So this is a key example as to why it's so important to identify failure modes properly, because it gets us on the right road and it allows us to figure out what we're going to do about something. So let me pause for a second and see if there are any questions. Hi, Ali. Thank you. You're joining us from Bahrain. Ali, I visited Bahrain a couple of years ago. It was a dream of mine to visit the Middle East, and I did it. Oh my gosh, Harris is from Jakarta, Indonesia. Colombia, Oscar, and Gabriel from Nigeria. Wow, thank you all for tuning in. Okay, any questions, put them in the chat, and Mark and Graham, let me know if you've got something to add. Let's move on to another example. Here's another classic example of a failure mode that is not written properly. AC motor seizes. Well, that's not really a failure mode. That's not what specifically causes failure. So my question would be, what specifically causes the AC motor to seize? Well, we could get a little bit more detailed here and say, maybe the electric motor bearing oil deteriorates due to normal use. Or maybe the intake screen clogs. Maybe the bearing seal leaks due to normal use. Or maybe the motor bearings wear due to normal use. Now, again, the reason why it's so important to break it down is because it's going to lead us to a different failure management strategy. For example, here we may decide to replace the oil on a regular basis. Here we may say, let's clean the screen on a scheduled basis, or our team may opt for condition-based maintenance, and maybe we'll monitor the differential pressure and clean it as required. For the seal leaking, Well, oftentimes there's really not a whole lot you can do proactively when it comes to seals, but usually seals start to, to seep or leak a little amount. And that can give you a clue that if you don't do something, it will eventually turn into a bigger problem. So maybe we want to monitor for leaks on rounds, right? Now, if we were in an operating environment where if we got a drop of oil, maybe we breach an environmental standard or regulation or law, and it would cost us a lot of money in fines, that would be a whole different story, right? But again, that's why it brings us back to why it's so important to identify failure modes properly in the first place. And the last one, perform vibration analysis. Maybe we might want to do vibration analysis on the bearings. So you see, when you look at the left-hand side versus the right-hand side, you can see why RCM potentially has gotten a bad rap in the past. Because if you just write AC motor seizures, well, what do we do about that? It just doesn't give us any sort of a direction. We don't know what road we're on. We could be on any number of roads. Okay. So that's what I have to say for what failure modes are identified. I'm going to show you a real world example, but I want to pause to see if there are any questions, or if Mark or Graham, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't think so, Nancy. There's a question down here from Abdul in the chat that says, do we need to write possible failure modes of each component of an equipment?
Okay, that's an excellent question, Abdul. And see, really, when we do reliability-centered maintenance properly, we should be thinking in terms of functions. So we should be thinking in terms of what we need our equipment to do. So then we can say, well, what specifically would cause it not to do that? Now, a facilitation technique is to, of course, look at drawings or schematics and brainstorm and look at different components. But Abdul, this is an excellent question, and I'm going to answer it in a little more detail. I've got some slides that are going to cover this exact point. So thank you for posing that question.
Nancy,
okay.
do you want to try another one as well? Because I think it's a fascinating question, and
okay.
I think it's not one I've seen phrased like this before. It's from who was it? It was Gabriel Fagade, who says, "How does your budget influence the failure modes that you zero down on?"
Oh, yes, this is an excellent question. Okay, so it goes back to the way I would answer it is this. It goes back to this. We live in the real world and not fantasy land. So we can't do RCM on everything. So it's important to focus in on those assets, or even certain systems of assets that are maybe the most critical to us, or that are causing us the most pain or costing us the most money. That's where I would begin. I mean, Gabriel, you're not alone if you were to say that you don't have infinite amount of money to do RCM on everything, or to do any kind of an analysis on everything. So it's important to start with what matters most. And it's very important to answer the question, what specifically causes failure? Because the answer to that question tells you what you have to analyze to figure out if you should be managing it, or how you should be managing it. Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
If I can unmute myself. No, I think that's great, Nancy. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So while the other questions are rolling in, I want to give you a real world example. And okay, so I do this for a living, right? The RCM is my thing. It's the technical love of my life. And I apply RCM principles really even in my personal life. That's a whole other conversation, but you really can. The principles are that versatile. But I got caught. So, okay, here is my Bluetooth Microsoft mouse, right? So the other day I went to use it, and we were having an IRCC meeting, Mark and Graham, you might remember, right? And it was one of those mornings, I wasn't running late, but I was like, I just had enough time to get online for our meeting and do what we needed to do. And now my mouse won't work, right? And I don't know about any of you out there, but you know the mouse pad that you use with your finger? Yes, it's usable and it's doable, but it's annoying because it slows you down, right? I can go really fast when I have a mouse. So it didn't work. So of course, the first thing I did is, I made sure the button on the back that was pressed, to turn it on. And I'm pushing. Can you hear the click? I'm pushing, and the light's not coming on. So the next thing I did, of course, was to take the back off to access the batteries. And this is what I found. So obviously it leaked because I had been using my desktop so much. My mouse was just sitting in my computer bag, and because of non-use, right? So what specifically caused this failure? Well, it leaked because of non-use. So if I had proactively identified that failure mode ahead of time, what I should have done was take the batteries out, put them in a little Ziploc bag, right? Put them in my computer bag, and then put them in when I'm ready to use my mouse. That's one failure mode. Another failure mode is that batteries discharge just due to normal use, right? They don't last forever. So what is the failure management strategy for that? Well, for that, what I should do is carry 2 spare batteries in my computer bag, right? So part of RCM is identifying the failure modes. So you can write the failure effect to see how each failure mode really matters. Now, in my case, not a huge deal that day, right? I mean, I just used the mouse pad that's built into the laptop. Now, if I had been facilitating an RCM analysis in front of my working group, those consequences would have been a little worse. I could still have made do, but that would have really slowed me down in front of a team, right? But if the consequences were even worse than that, I don't know, let's just be facetious for a second. Let's say I lose a client because my mouse doesn't work. Well, then another thing I could have done is I could just always carry like a backup mouse. So there are all now, and I know, so this is a very mild example, but I'm using this example to show you that I was caught real world because I had not proactively identified my failure modes. Luckily, the consequences were not severe. But now, as you can see, well, I had to buy another mouse because the failure effect of this is it actually ruined the connections there. So I had to buy another mouse. But now what I do is I carry, and truthfully, I did this before, but I always carry 2 spare batteries. But now what I do is I take the batteries out of my mouse when I'm not using my laptop, and then I just pop them in when I'm about to use it. So you see, that's why I think it's so important when someone tells you to do something, this is the right way to do this. For me, it always helps me to know, why do you need me to do that? Because if it makes sense to me, if it makes common sense, now I know I got skin in the game if I don't do this, right? So when you don't do this for your own equipment, I mean, it's like burning, you could potentially be burning your profits up, right? Because now, here's my other example. When we don't, I'm going to save it to the end. Okay, I'm going to give you a little preview, but I'm going to save it to the end. Okay. All right, let me see if there are any, do we have any questions, Mark? Okay,
sorry. Yeah.
That's okay.
Sorry, I was still muted. From Vince Polsoni, who says, are there published libraries of failure modes for specific equipment that can be referred to while performing an RCM analysis?
Okay, yes. I mean, you can certainly Google that, and libraries of failure modes do exist. So the only thing I would say is to use them with caution, because 2 things can happen. Number one, it can be a really effective brainstorming tool for you and your team. What's very important to note, though, is that these failure mode libraries do not take into consideration your operating context, right? Is your tow tractor being used on the deck of an aircraft carrier? Is it being used in the desert? Is it being used at the airport in Denver? where is your equipment being used? And how is it being used? How often is it being used? The libraries don't take that into account. Also, sometimes the failure mode libraries are way too deep of detail, which we're going to get to now in here in just a few minutes with level of detail. So it can be an effective brainstorming tool. But on the other hand, what I have seen happen is you can spend so much time combing through these failure mode libraries that you spend 2 or 3 times as much time going through the libraries as if you just queried your team of equipment experts and asking them, okay, what specifically causes this to fail? So in my experience, that's a much more effective and more efficient way to go. So what the short answer is use them carefully. Okay, all right. So let's now get into, okay, failure modes must be written with the right amount of detail. So we started off today talking about properly identifying failure modes, right? Now I want to talk about getting way too much in the weeds. And I think, was it Gabriel? No, it was Abdul. So now we're getting, I think, more to answer Abdul's question about do we write failure modes for each component for a piece of equipment? And this is another big reason that I've personally seen it. Another big reason why RCM gets a bad rap, and people say that RCM takes way too long, it takes too many resources. And it's also one of the misconceptions of reliability-centered maintenance is that you have to identify every single failure mode. Well, that is just not true. We need to identify all of the failure modes that are reasonably likely to happen in our operating context. There are a couple of nuances to that, but that's the gist of it, right? So here's what I mean. How detailed should failure modes be written? Let's say we're doing an analysis on a diesel engine. Well, I could just say diesel engine fails and I'm done, right? Well, that was easy. But obviously, that's way too vague. That's way too at high a level, because it's not written in a way that I can now figure out how I should manage it. So we need to get more detailed. So this is a good level of detail, what I'm going to show you now. So what specifically causes the diesel engine to fail? Well, the engine oil could deteriorate due to normal use. The engine oil could diminish due to normal use. The cooling fan drive belt could wear due to normal use. And the starter motor could fail, right? Now, obviously, those aren't all of the failure modes, but those are 4 failure modes that are written properly and in the right amount of detail. How do we know that? Because we can formulate an appropriate failure management strategy based upon the way they're written. For example, for engine oil deteriorates, we can decide to change the engine oil every 6 months. If we could also do CBM if we wanted to. This is just one example. For engine oil diminishes due to normal use, well, maybe we want to check the engine oil level prior to use, or once a week, or once a month. And what would that depend on? Well, that would obviously depend on your operating context. How often are you using this diesel engine? A cooling fan drive belt wears due to normal use. That may lead us to visually inspecting the belt every 500 operating hours. And for the starter motor fails, maybe no scheduled maintenance, right? Can we predict it? Can we prevent it? Probably not. So in this case, we may say we want to run that to failure. Now, of course, let's say the consequences of the starter motor failing is that 100 people could be injured. Obviously, we wouldn't say no scheduled maintenance to that. But see, that's the beauty of identifying the failure mode, writing the failure effect so you can assess how it matters, because that is what influences how you're going to manage it. But now getting back to Abdul's question, with starter motor fails, if we wanted to, we could get a lot deeper into this failure mode, right? Now, let's say for the purposes of example that the goal of our analysis is to identify a proactive maintenance plan, okay? So we're not dealing with design and we're not looking to develop a detailed troubleshooting procedure. Let's just say our goal is to come up with a good proactive maintenance plan. So let's focus in on our starter motor. We could get more detailed and say electrical connections loosen, armature insulation breaks down, solenoid fails, brushes wear, right? And in some of these cases, we may need to ask, well, what specifically causes those? But let's focus in on the solenoid fails now. What specifically causes the solenoid to fail? The plunger could stick, the coil could burn out, and so on. And we can keep getting more detailed. What specifically causes the plunger to stick, right? So you see how we can get really detailed. And when you don't have an experienced facilitator or someone experienced in RCM helping you or doing your RCM analysis, you can really go down a rabbit hole quickly. And this is one of the reasons why RCM gets a bad rap, because people end up with, thousands of failure modes for a piece of equipment that maybe if it had been done properly, certainly wouldn't have been as much. So here, in this example, for our analysis, what is most appropriate is starter motor fails, especially because with all of these, as detailed as we can get, the end result is going to be the same. We know using our common sense, we're going to run it to failure, and all of these have the same failure effect, right? With respect to how it affects the equipment and how it affects our operating environment and our business. So there you go. So Abdul, I hope that answered your question. Mark, do we have anything else that came in?
Yeah, okay, there's a discussion rather than just a single question coming here. So Edward at the beginning said, and I think it really ties in well to what you've just been talking about, Nancy, so I think it's worth doing it now. Edward first started off by saying, couldn't you use your root cause analysis to help write your failure modes, okay? Sanya's then replied with, I was about to ask that, and says, I think with RCM, it helps you predict the failure mode, but root cause analysis may be done after the failure. So do you want to take that one?
Yes. Okay, Sanya, kudos to you. Yes, absolutely, Ed. You could use RCA to help you write your failure modes, because that's essentially that's historical data, right? So you know that those failure modes are plausible. The problem with root cause analysis is generally it's done reactively. And the whole point of RCM and the whole point of identifying failure modes is to identify them proactively so that we're not at the mercy of our equipment. But I will also say to Ed, Ed, we both live in the real world, right? And as well as we can do an RCM analysis or any reliability analysis, right? It's essentially impossible to think of everything or identify everything, right? Just because that's just the way of the world. But when we do RCM proactively the right way, we really put ourselves in a position of strength to get, to be able to identify most of the failure modes that could occur. Okay, and Ed says he has an RCA library. That's excellent, Ed, because now you know what has specifically caused your equipment to fail. And, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing that it happened in an unplanned event. But the good thing is that now you know that failure mode exists. So now you're in a position of strength to implement a failure management strategy so it doesn't happen again, or so that you can head it off at the pass. Mark or Graham, do you guys have anything else?
No, that's great, Nancy. Thanks.
Okay, so this is what I wanted to end with. And the best way I can say that why it's so important for identifying failure modes properly is because when we don't, we end up being the puppet. And our equipment controls us, instead of us controlling our equipment. I mean, we're quite literally at the mercy of our equipment. And if you're out there and you're listening, if within your organization you're living in a reactive environment, and that can feel really icky, and it can make you feel like, oh, you can look on LinkedIn or surf the internet. It seems like everyone out there has got their, all their stuff together when it comes to reliability. But I hear from people every week where their goal is to get out of reactive mode. So if you're in reactive mode, you're not alone. We live in the real world, and that means that failure is going to occur. So really, I know Mark and Graham would say the same thing. If you do reliability-centered maintenance, it's certainly not the only thing you need to do to get the reliability you need from your equipment. There are of course other facets of reliability, but an excellent place to start is with reliability-centered maintenance, primarily because, and Mark, I think this was your topic. Am I remembering right, a few weeks ago? Because we start with functions, and when we write our when we write our functions properly, we identify what we need from our equipment, right? Not just to produce air, right? Or to produce compressed air. Like this presentation is not one of functions, but you see how it doesn't just say to provide compressed air. We get very specific about what we need the machine to do and not what it was designed to do. Maybe you have some more to say about that, Mark?
Yeah, no, I think you've probably said it, Nancy. In fact, I don't want to go too much further because I'm doing a presentation on functional failures in a couple of weeks' time, and I don't want to do that in the next 2 minutes. I want to spread it out over half an hour. No, that's great. Okay,
good. All right, so the last thing, to sum it up, this is the way I think about reliability-centered maintenance. If you have ever this is a topic for another live, but my engine oil low light came on when I was driving back actually from a maintenance conference. And again, it's like, this is what I do for a living, but I didn't have one of these in my car, and I didn't check my oil either. So anyway, have you ever tried to replenish your oil reservoir without a funnel? It's just a mess. Like, it gets the job done, but oil gets everywhere. Well, this is the way I like to think about reliability-centered maintenance. And what we do is we take our failure modes and we put them in our funnel, right? If you think of RCM as the funnel, all of the expensive ones and the cheap ones, and we put them into our RCM analysis, and what we come out with is our failure management strategy. So that's the way I like to think about reliability-centered maintenance. So, all right. So, Mark, do you want to give us just a super quick coming attraction here for you? You're going to be presenting in 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks to the day, Thursday, June 24th, 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. 12, 3 p.m. UK. Do you want to just share a little teaser about what you're going to talk about, Mark?
Yeah, I'm just going to tease a little bit because, we spend a lot of time in RCM courses teaching people about failure modes and about functions and about task selection. And the one thing we tend to really skip over quickly is functional failures. And the question I'm going to ask in that is, well, why do we bother? Why do we have functional failures in there? And it's really, really surprising how useful they are. And there are really good reasons for doing this properly. Doesn't necessarily mean you spend more time on them, but you just give them some more thought. I mean, I told people a few weeks ago, told people to give functions some more love. Well, the poor old functional failures were sitting in a corner, not getting any love at all at that point. And this is my apology for it. So I'm looking forward to it. We'll have some interesting examples of why it really matters that you get your functional failures right and how to do it. What makes a good functional failure, what doesn't.
I love it, Mark. I can't wait, because you're right. Functional failures, they don't get the attention that they need. So I'm personally looking forward to that. Okay, so before we go, what I would like to let you know is, if you want to attend Mark's event and you don't want to forget, you can go to rcmcertification.org/subscribe. Now, when you go there right now, you're going to see today's session. But if you sign up there, you'll be on our email list, and we will email you and we will let you know when our next event is coming up. And if you sign up, you can sign up for replays if you can't catch us live. So before we go, I would like to show you, let me see, let me stop sharing, and now let me share again. Okay, so as I mentioned in the beginning, we are examiners for the IRCC, the International Reliability Center Maintenance Certification Committee, and our level 1 RCM certification is up and running. So we invite you to come check out our website. I'm going to put it up there. Here's our website. It's rcmcertification.org. Come check it out and read what we're all about. And if you're interested in level 1 certification, all you have to do is get the level 1. Oh, let me see. Hold on. This is user error. Hold on. Get the level 1 certificate. You click the level 1 certification exam button, and all you have to do is enter your email address, set yourself up an account, put your details in, and you can get access to the level 1 exam. Now, if you are not ready to take the exam yet, but you still want to sign up, maybe you've got some RCM training coming up soon. Once you create your account and purchase access, that'll be valid for a year. So no worries there. All right.
Nancy, just one thing. Sharon's asked in the chat what was the link, and that's the link, I think, for subscribing to the video
here
reminders.
It is. Okay, I'll put that up. Hold on. Let me put it up.
Thanks.
Here we go. Just go to rcmcertification.org/subscribe. And if you are on the homepage, you can just go down to the footer and put your name and email address there. And that way you'll also get our updates. Either that or just go to rcmcertification.org/subscribe. All right. Well, Mark and Graham, any last comments or any last questions before we sign off for the day?
No, I think I'm happy, Nancy. That was great. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We're so delighted that you have decided to join us. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Graham. And so please do, I'm going to put this back up one more time. Please do join us on June 24th at 9 a.m. Central. And Mark is going to talk to us about functional failures, identify them properly, or pay for it later. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great rest of your day and a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye now.